Okay, hi everybody. I'm Georgia. You might know me from my book. Yes, it's really old. Yes, a new edition is coming out. Basically, as soon as my boss over here approves my training request, because I want to get the latest OSCP materials to make sure I'm teaching to the new test kind of thing. So there is a new edition coming. So if you win the No Starch raffle, maybe save it for a few months and buy my new book, or don't, whichever. You might also know me. I'm typically a mobile security researcher. Sometimes I do speaking and training. I haven't done much of that while COVID. Like I was a speaker at RSA right before COVID shut down, and this is my first talk after that. So I'm, yes, sweating profusely in terrible fear. So hopefully this doesn't go really terrible. But I'm also, a lot of people don't know this, what would be called a serial entrepreneur. I've founded a consulting company, and I founded a product startup. So instead of droning on today about mobile security and why we suck at it, I'm going to talk about how not to succeed at doing a cybersecurity startup. And throughout the talk, I have little quotes from, I wrote some people in my network and asked them for, pithy quotes about startups and advice for startup founders. So if you don't know Ron, he founded Tenable, so like Nessus. So they actually have a very interesting trajectory. They bootstrapped for 10 years. So Tenable was founded in 2002, and they didn't take venture capital. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about it in a little bit. They didn't take venture capital until 2012, so 10 years of bootstrapping. But then they did raise $50 million in that first round, raised some more money, and in 2018 they did do their IPO. So they are a publicly traded company. You can buy Nessus stock, which I am probably going to do with my next paycheck. So from Ron, he says that pitching companies should only take 5 slides. There's actually a slide later on that says don't listen to any advice from anybody, basically. But so this is, Ron does do angel investments. Again, if you don't know what it is, we will talk about it. So if you ever find yourself pitching Ron, I've given you some advice. Definitely only use 5 slides, because that's what he thinks you should do. But it turns out this worked really well, because it worked really well with my next slide, because the 5 slides you're typically going to use in a startup pitch are these 5 up here for building a company. So you will pitch a lot as a startup founder to potential investors, to potential customers, startup pitch contests, accelerator demo days, you name it. You're probably, if you're a founder, going to spend a lot of time up here. If you're like me and get nervous, well, I found there's not really anything you can do about it. You're just going to be nervous, and you're going to have to suck it up. So anyway, different venues are going to have different time lengths. Typically, it's shorter than even this 25-minute talk, usually somewhere between like 3 and 8 minutes for the pitch, so a little bit shorter, so that helps. So anyway, your typical 5 slides that are suggested, there's like 5 slide rules that have this. The main thing is a problem. If you're going to start a company, typically you want to solve some sort of problem. If you're a cybersecurity practitioner, you probably know a lot about problems. You see them every day. So you probably have a few ideas just off the top of your head of pain points that you have and how you might be able to solve them. So the problem statement is kind of like the big start of the pain point, and then your solution would be what you and your company are going to do to solve that problem. So once you've built your solution or have a idea for your solution, all your friends have told you how wonderful it is and how it's going to be great, and you're going to make $1 billion, then you might want to start looking at founding a company. And one of the things that's definitely going to come up is this thing called total addressable market, which, as far as I can tell, is mostly entirely made up. The only real rule for total addressable market is it needs to, like everything in startups, needs to be a hockey stick. It needs to go up and to the right. So, you're massively growing all the time. That's really, obscene growth. Like, the thing that makes the least sense about startups to me is that if you're making money, like if you're profitable, you're doing it wrong, which this is business. We're supposed to make money, right? But if you're profitable, you're not growing fast enough. You should be spending that money hiring new people, like spending it on sales and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of things about startup don't make sense. But most of the math about startups is entirely made up, and this is something that I had a lot of trouble with when I was starting because I wanted to make financial documents that actually were somewhat grounded in reality, but the truth is they're usually not. Actually, for mine, for total addressable market, I did all the people who buy pen testing products and security products, so the Nessuses of the world, and all the people who buy mobile device management and enterprise mobility management, and multiplied them together and got my total addressable market, which was in the billions and looked great on the slides, but I certainly have not sold anywhere near billions of dollars worth of anything. But yeah, you basically want to convince potential investors that you are going to sell a lot and that there is a market there for you to do so. Unfortunately, the next two parts are a little bit harder, traction and team. We can't just sit at our desk and come up with a great idea to convince potential funders that we have traction. I mean, traction is a really big one, and it's, again, another really big pain point for startup founders, because typically, your funders want you to have built your team, got at least a minimum viable product, hopefully even have people paying to use it before they invest in you and before you have any money. We'll talk about money in a couple of slides. But I mean, that's really hard to get to that point because people have to get paid and whatnot. People have to eat. So it's a real pain point of getting the amount of traction they want you to have. I mean, of course, there are exceptions to every rule in this. So I mean, certainly there are instances of if you've seen that Silicon Valley show where he basically just has an idea for Pied Piper and they're going to give him $10 million. He should have taken it, and there should have been no show. Like, he should have taken the money. That's all I have to say about that. So anyway, so traction, yeah, you want to get, like, everybody ask them to use your product, like, as a beta for, like, $1 or something, get some traction. Anybody you can get to sign on that you can put on your slide deck that, I would go to Jamie and be like, hey, can you say you're using my product and can I put it on my slide? And then I'd be able to put Ivan on my deck and it would look good. The line between, like, you don't want to lie, but everybody in startups kind of embellishes a little bit. So if you don't, you're not going to win any pitch contests. Also, like, at the early stages particularly, your team can be a proxy for some of the traction. Like, if you have like an advisor that has sold a couple companies in the past or has a lot of sales experience, if you have a team that's very impressive to the people who might be funding you, that can be a proxy for traction as well. But we will talk a bit more about team later on. All right. Some of you may know Marcus Carey from the startup community as well. He wrote the Tribe of Hacker books, I think he's best known for, but he also is a sometimes startup founder, went to the same startup accelerator as I did, and he had a company called ThreatCare that was acquired by ReliaQuest, so yay, success. I was not actually an investor in his company, though, sadly. And his quote is, "There are no rules." So again, I'm up here giving you my idea of some rules and best practices, but again, for every one of those bullet points, you are going to be able to find an exception where someone was successful doing exactly the opposite. So you have to find what works for you. It may take a lot of trial and error. I think a side point from this was, don't be too entirely set in your ways. Be ready to pivot. Another good advice for, like, startup founders is fail quickly or fail early. So if what you're doing isn't working, be ready to pivot and do something else quickly rather than digging in your heels. So be flexible as a startup founder, which I realize we as cybersecurity professionals typically are not. But it is what it is. All right, building a company. Okay, I'm based in the U.S., so these are U.S. terms, the LLC or Schedule C. But I talked to Jamie right before this, and he says you guys have similar things, so it's pretty much the same deal here in Canada, I think. So one of the first decisions you'll probably make after you've figured out what you're going to build is what kind of company you're going to be. In the U.S., we're typically LLC or a CCorp. LLC is a lot easier, a lot less paperwork. You can do it online for like $100. The taxes are a lot simpler and all of that. So why would you not want to be an LLC? Being a C Corp, if you're going to take institutional investment, so if you get past like angel investors, which we'll talk about this a couple slides from now. Wish I would stop hitting the microphone. They are going to expect you to be a C Corp. That's just what they expect. So you can start out as an LLC and migrate to a C Corp if you get to that point. I mean, a lot of startups never get to the institutional investment part. They're just so successful they don't need it, or they do fine with angels, or they even just bootstrap. So you may not ever find yourself actually needing to be a Schedule C. So it's certainly reasonable to be an LLC first and then change, because again, it is a lot easier with paperwork and stuff, and there's going to be enough going on that if it's one more thing you don't have to think about right now, fair enough, right? So as far as management and HR, the unfortunate thing is this is going to be you and your co-founders. You don't have to have HR until you're 50 people. Management, if you're like me and you're more of a practitioner type, I hate managing people. I hired a CEO specifically to do the hiring and firing and all that managing of people stuff because I don't like it. It gives me the willies. But unfortunately, you're going to have to take on a lot of this responsibility early on. You're probably, unless you get really lucky, just not going to have the money to fill all these kinds of positions early on. So you're going to be left, having to pick up some of that slack. A really big one is sales and marketing. So again, if you're anything like me, sales and marketing is not something that I'm good at. And I made the mistake of picking a CEO that I could relate to. Technically, we understood each other, but there was a problem with that. If you're like sales and marketing, if whoever's going to be in that role, that very important role of sales and marketing, because after all, unlike cybersecurity, where our goal is to be lead and make people come to our talks. In startups, your whole goal is making money. You actually have to make sales. So that's a very important role. So if the person you have in that role doesn't make you cringe as an introvert, you probably have the wrong person. You need somebody who has that personality that, at least for me, and I know a lot of others, typical cybersecurity practitioners, really just makes them want to run and hide. But that was definitely a mistake I made. I think somebody who was probably just as much on the spectrum as me, as my CEO, and he couldn't, when we went to events, we stood in the corner together, so I had someone to talk to, but we weren't out making sales and things. So it's not uncommon to have, you're going to have a go-to-market plan early on, so how you're going to make sales when you haven't made them yet, but going back to that total addressable market, they're going to be these are the customers we're going to go after. So establishing that your problem, this is, say, I was going into a company, this would be the person, this manager, or if it's a tool, for an individual practitioner, which a lot of us are going that route where, we've built a hack tool and now we want to make it a product, but still, our typical buyer is going to be, the individual on, say, the pen test team. We have to think about costs on that. If we want them to be able to put in their card and buy it themselves, we're going to be talking maybe $1,000 at the most. $500 is better. Obviously, the more your product costs, more money you make, but also they're going to have to get I wouldn't be able to buy, say, a $10,000 product without asking Jamie, as well as Tapio, and a lot of other people. So that would take time, and they would have to ask their people, and there would be a lot more to the sales cycle. So that definitely comes in. So if you're going to be selling to an individual practitioner, definitely you have to think about what are they going to be able to buy with the least amount of oversight and the least amount of red tape. And again, if somebody in the department buys it, you have to figure out who that someone is, who the advocate in the company is, who is going to understand that pain point, that same problem statement that you have, and be able to understand your solution and be able to advocate into that company that has a lot more going on besides buying security products probably, who's going to be able to advocate for you. And again, if you're a big expenditure, the bigger expenditure you have, you want to be in budget. and you're looking at bigger sales cycles that are going to be in next fiscal year as opposed to like next fiscal quarter, as it gets bigger, because you have to get up more and more approvals. So every investor will figure that everybody knows like 3 to 5 people somewhere in security. Like I said, I would go to Jamie and say, hey, can Ivan say they're using my product? Or better yet, can Ivan beta my product and tell me how it sucks and how I can fix it? So investors are going to assume you have 3 to 5 people. I ran into the a problem of being afraid to ask people. As a startup founder, you can't have any shame anymore. Call in all your favors, get everybody to help you. But anyway, investors assume you have like 3 to 5 people that will agree to trial your product and say, this is good. So they're really going to be looking to see, this is how we get our first paying customer, this is how we get our first 3 to 5 paying customers, this is how we get 10. They definitely want to see growth. This is how we get our first 100 paying customers. So yeah, just having like 3 to 5, I mean, certainly it helps, like having 3 to 5 like trials, especially if they're like big name companies that the investors may have heard of. That does give you some credibility there, but definitely you want to beat your own Rolodex. Definitely, like anybody do the spamming thing, have no shame, ask people to help you. Do not be like, I think we have a problem in cybersecurity. We don't like business a lot of the times. We think that's uncool. And we also almost it's a bad thing to succeed, if you're you want to be elite and underground and whatever. So if you're working for the man and making money and making sales and whatnot, then you're uncool. So, but you got to put all of that aside. Actually grown up people realize that making money and stuff is actually good. So you kind of have to put aside, some of the mentality I think a lot of us grow up with, in the cybersecurity community in order to be successful in business. So yeah. Here's this big one. Fitting your company into a customer's budget line item. Okay, so this is something you might want to keep in mind. Because you want to be innovative, right? We all want to be building the newest, coolest thing. But if your customers don't have any way to pay for it, if it's not in their budget, it makes it that much harder for them to buy it. It's 10 minutes. All right. I'll just give a little aside. So mobile device management, enterprise mobility management. Don't really like them. I don't think they're very helpful in terms of security, but that's a whole different talk. But when they first came out, they had the absolute perfect market because everything had just changed from everybody's bringing BlackBerries to everybody's bringing Androids and iPhones to work. So everybody pretty much, the bigger companies had a line item in their budget for a BlackBerry Bez server, but they didn't need it anymore because the BlackBerries were being phased out rapidly by the iPhones and the Androids. So there was actually money in people's budgets for the BlackBerry Bez, but here was something that the problem being we need to manage mobile devices of the Android and iOS variety, and the BlackBerry Bez is specifically for the BlackBerry, so their solution was mobile device management and early enterprise mobility management. And it was a great market because, again, there was a line item there. It is very, very difficult if you have to create a new Gartner category at every customer you go to. I know because I did it and it was difficult, being not mobile threat defense, but not really traditional pen testing, but being a completely different category. I mean, it was difficult. All the people all the time are like, yeah, I totally get this. This is totally a problem. We totally need to solve it. But then when it came to finding somewhere in their budget for it, even at a small price, it a lot of times is very difficult. So if you can find a place where you can fit yourself into the customer's existing budget, basically you want to, instead of being completely innovative, if you can do something, if you can solve a problem better or cheaper that they already know that they have, then that is your ideal way to get yourself in the door, and then maybe do something completely innovative as your second product or something. So yeah, definitely scale. Yeah, that's good. All right, we should go on to the next slide. All right, quotes from founders. You probably don't know this guy unless you've like seen him wandering around behind me. He's very well known in startups, but not, he's not really in cybersecurity. So this is Michael, one of my longtime advisors. So everyone will tell you their version of the truth. Listen to all of them, but find your own truth. So I already kind of touched on this. I like to say that, when I talk, Michael's voice comes out sometimes. I mean, he kind of took the raw materials of me and turned me more into what's acceptable for a startup founder. But he's on the spectrum too, so that helped. Because he's kind of had to make the same transition. But basically, what Michael is, he is the founder of a startup that I am invested in, but he's basically a professional advisor, so he advises a lot of different companies. We'll talk about advising in just a moment. But he is basically one of the people who hangs around a lot of accelerators and stuff and helps startups, but he's one of the good guys. We'll talk about the bad guys too. But anyway, all right, need to get moving. Funding a company. First rule of startups, other people's money. Oh my God, I wish I had done this. When I started doing a startup, I had savings. I do not anymore. When Jamie found me, I was driving for Uber Eats. I'm not kidding. I was that broke. I did a couple things wrong. I didn't take a salary. You think you're like, well, let's pay everybody else. But if I had taken a salary, that's money I could have reinvested. And I invested my own savings in the company. So yeah, the company was basically eating my money. Everybody in the company was eating my money. It led to financial problems. Things are a lot better now, partially because Jamie hired me, and I make money again, at a lot faster rate. It's interesting in your day job. I'm talking about like go quit your day job and start a company, but it's kind of interesting getting paid every 2 weeks regardless. So I mean, don't necessarily just throw that away. But anyway, so yeah, definitely but even Michael, from the last slide, he will admit to the fact that he's put like over $1 million of his own money in his own company. This is a very, very hard, if you're struggling and you just need to get over a hump, it's very hard not to put your own money in it if you have it. But definitely try to find other options. I mean, bootstrapping, we mentioned that Tenable bootstrapped for 10 years. That basically means the money that you're making from your sales, you're putting back into the company. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable way to run a business. I mean, it may not be that hockey stick startup trajectory, but not everybody has to be a startup. The accelerators will tell you this. The only way to exist is to be a startup. But there's plenty of small businesses or big businesses that do bootstrapping, never took venture capital, and everything's great, and they're probably better for it. 2 minutes? Okay, I better hurry. Government grants. Yes, talk faster. Government grants are awesome. Non-dilutive funding, they won't want stock. So definitely taking government grants if you can get them. DARPA's Cyber Fast Track is sadly not around anymore, but that's where I got my start. But there are things like Small Business Innovation funds, SBIR, in the US. I'm sure there's something similar here. Silicon Valley Innovation Products going to accelerators. They usually are going to take a percentage of your company, but they may give you money, and they will give you their network and give you a micro MBA. Friends and family and fools. So this will make for a bad Thanksgiving if you fail. I know. Crowdsourcing, I mean, this works better for consumer products. Angel investors, so that's where I'm at, where I make a small investment. I mean, there's a lot of angel groups, particularly if you went to a university, there's probably an angel alumni association, and you don't necessarily have to have gone to that university to do it. And then institutional venture capital and private equity, and we need to hurry. So I wanted to get everybody's quote in. This is Dave Merkel. He was CTO of FireEye. He also calls himself the First Lady of Herndon. Basically, it's a long quote. He did not take my advice on being pithy. But basically, the long and the short of it is that everybody's story has luck. People don't tell it that way later. They kind of tell it as it was predestined. But definitely, you have to stick around long enough to have the luck. Is another one of Michael's quotes, and they're going to throw me off the stage. But very quickly, I want to talk about advisors and mentors. Typically, if you're more technical, typically the founder becomes the CEO, but you might want to consider moving over to the founder and CTO role and bringing on somebody who has more experience in business and particularly sales, somebody with a more outgoing personality. Investors really don't like single founders, so if you have any friends at all, consider making them a co-founder. Typically early on, you're not going to have need for a full financial person, but there are people who do fractional CFO. That's what they do, fractional CFO for startups, so we probably have something like that. A really big part, though, is advisors, people who, throwing me off. Can I have one more minute? Okay. All right. So people who, so these are people you're not going to pay up front, which is great because you probably don't have a lot of money, but for 1% of the company or, whatever you work out, they will put their name on the slide, as traction or proxy for traction, as well as, help you out. There are some advisors who just hang out at startups and just, take 1% of every company they can find. You never hear from them again. So that's the bad. On the other side, you have really, really great advisors like Michael who are not going to be there for just this startup. They're going to help you move. They're going to be at your wedding. They're going to help you with the next 5 startups. So you can find really great people for that. And that's, unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about accelerators, but a lot of what you're going to get out of accelerators, aside from the micro MBA, you do learn about running a startup, but is getting their network and meeting a lot of potential advisors. So our last quote, what was I thinking? Actually attributed to Michael's roommate, but every startup founder ever has said that at some point. All right, so we're not going to get to talk about accelerators and incubators. So that was really the last thing. They really want to get me off the stage. But anyway, so obviously this talk went longer than I thought, unfortunately, but I'm going to try and give a 50-minute version sometime next year. But thank you guys for your time. We don't really have Q&A, but I'll be here for the next couple hours.